Welcome to DMDPM podcast, where we cut through the noise of product jargon to deliver actionable step-by-step insights from industry practitioners, helping founders and product leaders turn complex concepts into clear, practical strategies you can apply today. And this podcast is a bit different. The goal is to provide you with meaningful insights in an engaging way. That's why we split into 4 sections. The intro, where we learn about our guest. The second part, the most asked questions about the topic, followed by the Mythbuster, where we discuss the main things that people tend to get wrong about the topic. And the final part is the threshold concept, where we ask our guests to break down the absolute essentials, the minimum you need to know to really grasp and excel at the topic. I'm Diana, your podcast host. I'm a product coach and consultant. I work with B2C business leaders and their product teams to halve product development cycles by focusing on the biggest problems and validating early. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Stuart Winter-Tear, Head of Product at Genaios, leading the team building LLM products. Stuart has a diverse experience across e-commerce, cybersecurity, and AI, and a lot more. And he strives in the startup environment, leading product innovation and growth. If you haven't already, I definitely recommend following Stuart on LinkedIn because he posts relevant insights about the constantly changing world of AI, and he shares his experience of what it actually takes to build LLM products. And this is today's topic. How does implementing LLM products differ from traditional products? Thank you so much for joining, Stuart.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Let's start by, telling the listeners a bit about your background and expand on your experience building LLM products.
Yeah, sure. So 20 years in cybersecurity, doing everything you can imagine. And I brushed regularly alongside what is now termed traditional AI. Sort of GenAI seems to have encompassed all AI for most people in their thinking, but of course that's just not true. So predictive models and anomaly detection and things like that go along with cybersecurity. But it was like everybody else a couple of years ago, when ChatGPT came out. I just couldn't help myself. I loved it, and it was sort of seeing something new after years of kind of sameness. So I dived in. I really wanted to learn about it, but I went a bit overboard because I did a specialized course on Coursera in building these networks, neural networks, what have you. And before I knew it, I was in Greek symbols and equations and goodness knows what else. And there was many stages. I thought, what on earth am I doing to myself here? But I did get through it, and it was a great triumph. I'm glad I did that because it kind of gave me the language and the understanding. I'm not advocating for everybody to go that deep. I don't think you need to. But, shortly after I joined, and that's where I am now, I joined Genaios, which is a German startup specifically focused around GenAI. And so I've had a year of building with the team, and kind of that's the experience that I talk from today.
Interesting. How have you found the transition between traditional AI and Gen AI? Is there anything that was surprising?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, I'm talking from a product perspective, so frame it like that. So the first thing is to sort of explain that we've moved from the deterministic rules-based coding world where you put in X, you get out Y every single time. Now, working with large language models, you put in X and Y may vary. So we're in the probabilistic world, which brings up many challenges, which we'll sort of flesh out as we go through. I think that's the biggest challenge. The second one, from a product perspective, is having really 2 roadmaps, especially if you're working on the more cutting edge side with excellent researchers, because you now have the engineering timeline, which we're quite adept at from a product perspective, but you also have the research timeline to bring those two in alignment, and very often you'll find one going in front of the other. And research, especially when they're researching things that are unknown to them when they begin is very hard to predict. So, from a product perspective, we're sort of thumping the desk to get exact timelines. But of course, this is research. So, very often it's unknown up front, the feasibility of these things. So that's an interesting challenge as well, but one that's very enjoyable.
Oh, okay. And when you mean research, you mean like the data science research, not the
Exactly.
user design
No,
and user.
no,
Okay.
that's exactly right. Yeah, sorry, I should have made that distinction. So, yeah, specifically, the researchers, data scientists, researchers that are, looking at papers that are being released every day, and then looking at the feasibility, and we look at, is this something that we could potentially have in the product or have as a product, and the first stage is to go through that process of researching, which is very difficult to timeline.
Interesting, because I obviously in traditional development, the more you kind of work with engineering teams as a PM, and the closer you work with your engineering lead, you kind of grasp the feasibility of something
Yep,
because it's been done so many times.
exactly.
But when it comes to AI,
Yep,
everyone's like, okay, we're not
exactly.
sure. So that's why, like, I guess the risk of not being something that we can do, or I guess there's also the uncertainty of the things that you might find out. So obviously, as we go through the podcast, it will be really interesting to really go through what are the differences of the process and the thinking
Yeah.
between, okay, this is how we're like nailing it. Okay, you know where you start from your design, and you know where you're going from testing and launching. But I think with GenAI and AI products is the different elements that you kind of have to add, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's always this underlying fear that if you're investing considerable time into something specific, that there'll be a new evolution, new research paper that comes out that can potentially undermine that. So you have to think about that from a competitive perspective as well.
You're obviously very, very well positioned to really highlight what are the main differences between LLM, Gen AI products, and building traditional products.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start with something that's probably unexpected, and this is the cool trap. Okay, so this technology is very cool, and it can give you the wow factor. And there's a strong temptation to, we can build this, we should build this, it'd be really cool. And the problem with that is that if you focus on technology, you end up with more technology. But if you focus on the customers and the business, you end up with more customers and business. And it's a very deceptive trap. So it's very, very important, probably in all of product, but especially in this arena, to think strategy first. It's a bit of a cliche. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. It's something I always kind of think to myself from Sun Tzu. But it's absolutely true. You really have to put that strategy first. And the second major difference, of course, is that deterministic and probabilistic aspect that I talked about. And of course, in that probabilistic aspect, you have to accept that it won't always work. There's always a percentage of potential error. And then comes the question of how do we communicate that to our users? And that's a big UX challenge, because it's one of education as well. And that's not just a problem, obviously, for me as a head of product. This is a problem for everything that's moving to the probabilistic world. That communication of sometimes things are going to go strange. There's another aspect to building large language models products, and that is, in many respects, you have to build live, which is very scary. And what I mean by that is, just because in the research academic world, it worked really, really well on a constrained data set, odd things can happen when the rubber, meets the road, and that model goes out into the wild. So that necessitates a lot of watching what's happening, and analyzing what's happening once it gets into the wild. And in order to kind of do this from a UX perspective, there has to be, in my mind anyway, a lot of transparency and explainability, trying to explain not only that models can veer off course, but how did it reach this decision? What is the rationale behind it? So that you can try and explain that to users. And what that means is that you need very, very rapid and good feedback loops from the users, from the customers, so that you can build that trust that they're building with you, and also get that feedback, of course, because you really do want to know when your models have erred, and kind of get that sentiment. And of course, on top of that, you can deal with things like model drift. Just because it's working now does not necessarily mean it's working in 2 months. From a product perspective, it's quite interesting because I'm a big advocate of the product triad, or what I mean by that is looking at product through the lens of the desirability, feasibility, and viability. And just to sort of put that in perspective, what I mean is desirability is very much looking at the users and what they need. The viability aspect is looking at the business and what that needs, and the feasibility aspect is the technological. Can we build this? Can we scale it? Can we support it? But when you start building large language models, I would actually probably expand that out to a quartet and add datability in there, because the garbage in, garbage out is absolutely true. Really the point is to get the data right first. That's an awfully big topic. Probably wouldn't want to get too much into that.
This is so interesting. I mean, I think as part of that, I got so many questions popping in my head. I think one of the ones that you were talking about was building live, and I remember going to a few meetups where product leaders take you through, this is how we approach this problem and this is how we launch new products, and there was definitely that risk you're taking. And I'm wondering, do you think that we're looking at the different mindset, the product managers and the leaders when launching products, like how to you approach? Because a lot of businesses, if they're like very risk adverse, how do they actually go about it?
My answer to that, is there a different mindset, is yes, absolutely. From a product perspective, in my opinion, there's a lot that's the same. Of course there is. There are the same frameworks and rules that work very, very well. But we are in a different arena and we have different players, and these models operate in different ways. One thing I would advise, and it's something I've done in my workplace, is when you do release live, try to do that in a community that you've already built up some reputation with, like a Discord community. I don't think it's any coincidence that some of the most successful large language model GenAI startups have built big communities on Discord, who are very forgiving, and they are early adopters. So try to and family to begin with. So it's very difficult from a risk averse perspective for a large enterprise, and we've seen that play out with chatbots, the sort of biggest current use case for these kinds of things in support and customer service, and I can understand why they want to leverage this technology. I think that's self-evident, but things can go awry, and we're all on that learning path, because nobody, and I'll say this absolutely with confidence, nobody can sit there and say, I'm an absolute expert in everything. I know all the security problems, I know all of the prompt injections, I know all of the ways this can be manipulated. Nonsense. I come from the security world, and I know there's a bit of a scramble going on at the moment, and I was old enough to be, sort of see the rise of the internet, and I had an e-commerce company, and I look back on the security of that, and it's terrifying. And I see a big similarity where we are. I feel like it's the wild west of the internet of the early 2000s. So yeah, I can really understand. There's so much you have to consider. Risk appetite is a very powerful one, and the truth of the matter is that if you need something predictable and very, very reliable all the time, then perhaps large language models are not the route, and that's fine too.
But
Yeah.
that comes back to exactly the point that you said around you don't want to build it because it's cool.
Yep.
You want to understand, okay, what is this technology
Yep.
enabling us to do?
Yep.
Okay, what is it that we care about? Is it high level of accuracy? Then does this actually work for us? And what are the use cases that works for? Because I
Yeah.
think, with a lot of companies that are looking for, testing out, I feel like the implementation is as important as the use case you are choosing to go with, because you should really think through what is the value, what is the problem I'm solving, and why would I choose an LLM, like whether it's like GenAI model to do it. Is that actually going to be a better business decision? And this is where it comes back to, how do you even measure, is this actually a better, like more viable for the business than building it traditionally?
I just completely agree. See a tendency to, and I understand the pressure on the C-level, on the board. This fantastic new cool technology comes out. We want this, we want this, implement it somewhere, and then it's sort of sent down the chain, and everybody's running around, where can we put this technology? And that's where the problem begins, because what you're doing is you're taking a technology and kind of trying to reverse engineer where you can shove this in, and that's the route to disaster always. You have to begin the other way round, from the strategy perspective, not the technological perspective. You have to start from strategy, which is to say, exactly as you said, what is the use case? And I like to look at use cases through and people don't necessarily like this, but from the jobs to be done. If you listen to, I can't remember his name, but he talks about it as struggling moments that are underserved. Start there, and then look at the technologies that could potentially solve this. And if the large language model happens to be at the top of that list, then okay, that's good. Start digging into that, but not the other way around.
Yeah, it feels like you start from a very similar foundation, like any product, where you have a deep understanding of your customers, of how your product is performing across the different touch points, so you know where you need to improve. And the added layer is data.
Yep.
You need to have a deep understanding of the quality of
Yep.
your data, not forgetting about the problem layer and your confidence of what's the value of this problem and how big is this problem for the users,
Yep.
and what we want to achieve or what change we want to see. That all stands true regardless of the technology.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up the issue of data there. Someone I admire greatly, Vin Vashishta, he's a very well-known AI expert and consultant, and he has a sort of data maturity model that begins right at the beginning and moves through, and right at the end you come to large language models and GenAI and things like that, and that takes time. And the problem we have is that people are focusing on the end of that maturity model when they haven't been through that process, and it doesn't lead to good things. It's okay to take time and go through a maturity process with your data before you move on to these more advanced technologies, in my opinion.
Yeah, what's the best way to start the journey on building AI products?
From my perspective, you have to know something about AI and large language models, and the key to that, the first key to that, is start using it. You have to deep dive and get that osmosis of what this technology is capable of, but probably more important, its limitations. Have GenAI with you, have a subscription to Claude AI, have a subscription to Perplexity, have it as a co-pilot and brainstorm with it and sanity check with you, and just start that process. And there are so many great courses out there now that aren't quite as deep as the ones I went into, with deep learning.AI and some on Coursera, and Pendo even has specifically some product manager free product manager AI course, and it's very good. It's very high level, of course it is. These are very high level, but it begins that process, and I would really encourage product people to do both of those things. That we're all hard pressed and we don't have much time. But I think it's necessary because AI is going to impact product quite considerably in two directions. One is the use of AI for product management, and the second one, obviously, is the pressure to build AI inside the technology we have and to build AI native products. So, I just encourage folk to begin that process. It's not as scary as you think.
Definitely recommend. I mean, I'm using. I use ChatGPT. Well, definitely, I need to try Claude and Perplexity. I haven't actually used
I love
any
them.
of those.
Yeah.
But I pay for the subscription and I create my own GPTs, and I'm like, it's
Yeah.
so much trial and error. I think
Yeah.
that's what it is. It's like you have to
Yeah.
start just so you can go through the phase of getting things wrong for a while. But
Yeah.
the sooner you start, the more you're going to understand and know the capabilities of those things, and then know how to. Because I think it's always the same with product managers. The more you have an understanding of how the engineering process works or
Yeah.
how the solution comes together, the more you can contribute, challenge, think through the different
Yeah.
product elements for it. I think it's the same here. You have to just get yourself to a place where you know what it can do. And luckily, I feel like at the moment it's kind of a level ground, because like this is new for so
Yep.
many people. You could actually accelerate. Like this is a moment where even if you don't have that exposure, you could easily, by investing the time, be able to position yourself in a better place than other people.
Yeah, I agree with that. Some of the courses that I've mentioned, they get you into a Jupyter notebook and you start interacting with large language models very, very simply in Python, for example, and you just get this real feel for how this works. And exactly as you said, that then enables you to kind of have that understanding when you're speaking to research, data, and I mean data science research, when you're speaking to engineers and data engineers and things like that. Obviously you don't understand to their depth, but you have an idea, you understand the concepts, and it raises an interesting point because MIT, I think it was McKinsey, some months ago, were trying to look at why so many data science projects and products fail, and it's very, very high. And they came to the conclusion it was because of a lack of what they call connectors and translators. Okay, what they were talking about there's a mismatch between this kind of data world inside organizations and the business and the market. Of course, as soon as I heard that, you think, well, hold on, product is actually very well positioned to be, we don't need a new role. That, in my opinion, is product to be that communicator and to understand the business, be able to communicate with the business, and to be able to communicate bidirectionally between that and research and engineering, and at the same time have that very sort of customer market focus, which I think is part of product, and be able to sort of be that glue in the middle of all of this to ensure that the things that are being built do bring value to the business and do bring value to the market. And even if they're internal tools, that ability to be able to sort of push back and say, okay, what is the problem you are trying to solve before just building it? Because very often we're all guilty of it. We jump to a solution before we really understand what's going on, because is it a problem? What's the problem under the problem? What's the context of the problem? Is there another way to solve this problem? Do they really understand the problem, and is it of great importance? And things like that before we just jump in and start building. And I think that's where a lot of it's gone wrong, historically. And it does necessitate, from a product perspective, that understanding and being able to talk the language of both the business and data science and engineering. As I say, not to the depth that they understand it, but to have that understanding, that broad understanding, and so you can talk that language between the two. And it necessitates rolling
Yeah.
your sleeves up and getting into a course and you're getting on Jupyter notebooks, whatever it is, and using GenAI and just getting it by osmosis. And then you can start to understand so many things that perhaps you wouldn't otherwise, and be very, very difficult to do that role very successfully if you haven't taken that time. In my opinion, that might be controversial, but
Yes. Okay. Now we can go to some more questions, but I think a lot of it is going to follow on from all the discussions we've been having. And we covered a bit around this, but what are the main challenges when it comes to user experience design when building AI products?
yeah, that's a really good question. I'm going to start with something very positive because I think, I sense an air of depression in the kind of UX community and design community, and at the moment. And the irony is that I truly believe that, let's just say, like, UX is kind of third on the list. I think it's going to become first on the list and move to primary importance. And that's because of things like multimodal personalization is coming, and there's going to be an awful lot that needs to be done from a UX perspective to get this right. We're still kind of in the old paradigm, and the idea of a kind of box that we just chat in is going to be looked back on as something quite archaic quite soon. And in many respects, those that nail the UX part are going to be the winners. That's just my sort of prophecy. That's how I feel about it. And from a UX perspective, especially as I've been talking about that probabilistic world, there needs to be that way to set user expectations, because we know that the model will fail. That's the nature of probability. And we need to find ways from a UX perspective to be able to set those expectations and understanding, and that can only be done through transparency and education. But it will bring about a large degree of trust, in my opinion, because there's a lot of I can sense that air of disappointment in some ways with GenAI because of these problems, sort of hallucinations and things like that. And I think where it's been so hyped up, but it is a great technology, and it will have a massive, probably underestimated impact, and we need to, through a UX perspective, educate. And also from a UX perspective, and I'll probably just keep repeating the same things, but it's so important. More than ever, we need that user feedback. We need those fast feedback loops. We need the users to have the ability to be able to tell us that this is great, this is not great, to be able to give us free-form feedback, give us the idea of the quality as they see it or perceive it. And that's very important, that user perception. And I think that humans are probably the best gauges. Our users are the best gauges of this technology, and we need to make them part of the process, and that's going to be through the UX. So it's going to be an enormously important role, which I think, I'm not seeing people say much about the UX side, but it's going to become paramount, and the ones that nail it will win.
Yeah, I think you're right. The chat interface is just the launch of
The
it.
beginning, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to grow, and I actually read somewhere like a LinkedIn post about what do kind of the latest successful startups have in common, and one of them is the fact that they launched with a community. So
Yep.
similar to what you said about
Yep.
Discord, is because you need to have that trust, and you
Yep.
need to have the really fast feedback loop. And to be fair, I did a course on, like, I think it was like changes for like kind of AI, like how would you design for Gen AI products, and
Yep.
the design of prompting to get the feedback is such a key part, because like, how do you create the interaction that if a user does find a wrong answer or an end of a conversation, UX is going to make all the difference between them
Yeah.
giving you feedback or them being like, this is rubbish, I'm never coming back. And you want to know when and what triggered that, and exactly what you said, like auditing what has happened to that person to know. It's not like you have now analytics and be like, okay, is this page that is static that drives the biggest drop off, and we should change the page, and then as we change the page we'll know more about it. It's like, what answer did we give to all these people that dropped off? So yeah, it's a very interesting space from that tracking and being able to understand your customers.
Yeah, agreed. And trust is hard earned and easily lost. But people are very forgiving if you're upfront and transparent about these things. That's just my experience.
Yeah, interesting. And kind of linked with trust, I think there's been a lot of ethical like discussions about the AI, but maybe it can cover some of the key ethical considerations that are like unique to AI products.
There's a lot to this. Obviously, we could speak all day about this. So, if it's okay, I'll highlight the two that are kind of top of mind at the moment, that are niggling away at me. The first is things, and I am a user of it, and I love them. Things like Perplexity and Google Gemini, that we're using now to do things like research. There's a significant problem that worries me with these technologies. We used to go obviously to Google every time we wanted to know something, but now if we use Google Gemini or Perplexity, we're not using a search engine anymore. Google is a search engine. We're using an answer engine, and the problem with that is that effectively they've scraped the web, and now they're providing answers from web pages fantastically, to answer our research questions. And to their credit, they do obviously provide links. But I'm finding that unless I need to validate that knowledge, I don't go to those links, which means in effect we're starving the primary source. And that, from an ethical consideration, worries me. Although, and there is some talk of a huge drop off. This is unverifiable. A huge drop off in web page visits due to the new Gemini release. But as I say, that's unverifiable and could be about ads rather than. But it does concern me. The other thing that's top of mind at the moment is things like screening for interviews using AI, GenAI, and this has become a reality now. So I know it's quite unbelievable. You have full 1 hour interviews with a generative AI, a person, if you can call it that, and they're meant to be incredibly difficult because there's kind of no emotion behind them, and it's just question after question after question, and they're very, very challenging questions, and it's making people feel quite cut off from the process. And alongside that, something that's been raised is that if English, for example, is not your first language, there's a feeling that it could potentially go against you. And things like that really do concern me. Duolingo, it was during this week, they released a paper, to their credit, about this issue, and they were talking specifically about English exams, English tests that are extremely important, that Duolingo and other providers, they give this to people for things like admission to college and things like that. And there's a big ethical consideration around this. Again, from perhaps those that don't have English as a native language, and they have to be very, very careful, with their data sets, so they can represent others that perhaps, as I say, don't have English as a second language, and not be penalised, through bias because of that. And Duolingo publicly announced, talked about this in their paper, and announced their ethics around this, which was first was validity and reliability. Second was, I think, fairness. The third was privacy and security. Well, they didn't actually say security. I think it was just privacy, but they do talk about security in the paper. And the other one was transparency and accountability, the fourth one. And it was an excellent paper, and to their credit, by publishing that paper, they were in that act, being transparent and having accountability, which I respect, and there needs to be an awful lot more of that. So these are the ones that are top of mind for me. Is that kind of all the knowledge from the web, and then starving the sources, and the second one is this issue around biases in models, that are very, very important, for college admissions and interviews and things like that, around those that don't have English as a first language, and sort of being cut off from the process. So yeah, those are the two that are really with me at the moment, and I do an awful lot of thinking around these issues. I have to.
Yeah, I think makes a lot of sense, especially around biases in models. That has been around for ages, even before GenAI. I remember, was it banks that they were using LLMs to decide whether someone should get the loan or not, and then
Yeah.
obviously the model started grouping people and started jumping to conclusions, and then it was like, well, that's why I think for the last few good years everyone's been like diversity of thinking in the product development cycle, so that you're thinking about the use cases. So I'm imagining for the languages, you would hope that the model knows the difference, and it should be like the model shouldn't penalize people that, English is not their first language, because they should have been, whoever's been building it, considered, okay, this is the variety of people we have.
Yeah.
Those are the things that you should care about versus the things that we don't really care about. Because actually, let me just think, what other questions could
Well, there was one that I really would like to talk about, if that's okay. It's a big one. How business models differ
Yes.
for large language model products compared to kind of software products, and it's a fabulous question.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
the point I really want to talk about is pricing and monetization, the revenue part,
Okay.
because we've all come, well, not all, but many of us have come from the traditional B2B SaaS world, and in that we have our frameworks and we have our playbooks of what works and what doesn't, etc., etc. And it can be a big shock, and it's going to be a big shock to anybody that's involved in pricing and monetization. Large language models, GenAI is going to be a big shock. Because simply the traditional B2B SaaS models of pricing and monetization just don't work. And I'll give you an idea why. There's two dilemmas in large language models, two strange sort of paradoxes. And the first is wasn't coined by me, but it's the gym paradox. Going to the gym, you make more money as a gym owner from those that don't come to the gym, pay for their yearly subscription and never come. And it's the same with GenAI. But with GenAI, you have a flip problem, which is some of your users who have paid $19.99 for the month are extreme users, extreme, and those users are operating at a significant loss. So you're in this kind of dilemma, and we're seeing it play out. I'm not going to mention who, but they're big names, sort of running these GenAI products alongside traditional products who are losing money because of this. And they've based it on the per seat, the per user, the fixed cost, and it's causing them significant problems. And the other one is that basing it on seat and per user, if you have a technology like a creative technology, I as an employer need that technology for my business, and have a team, say, of 6 in my business that are working with that technology to create whatever it is for me. All of a sudden, the people that created that technology introduced GenAI, and in the process they shoot themselves in the foot, because they've now made the process effortless and easy, and I don't need 5 people to do it anymore. And there's an ethical dilemma right there. Because you're kind of trying to deny it's going to impact jobs, but I only need 2 people to do that now, because GenAI has made this significantly easier. But I'm charging per seat, okay? But now that enterprise is only paying me for 2 users; they don't need 6 users anymore. So I've advanced my product, and at the same time cannibalized my own core cash cow, and we're seeing that everywhere. Google was in this dilemma that's why they fumbled the ball. But they've had to join the party now, because they're based on ads through Google search. But obviously, if you go through Google Gemini or Perplexity, they're not going to make that money anymore. But they've had to join the party. So there has to be a shift in how we think about this. Canva just recently announced that they're going to increase their prices by 300%. For teams, which caused a lot of consternation online, and their justification for that was because of the value that AI brings within Canva. And what they're doing is they're looking at GenAI within their product in terms of the value that it brings. So they're saying, okay, fine, we've brought this considerable value, they probably know that they're going to lose users because there's not going to be so many needed to do the same job. So they're increasing prices. That's one way to go, I suppose. But I've said this online many times, that we need as much pricing innovation as we need innovation with the technology. And there's very, very different ways that we can go about this. We can say, okay, we will charge you based on the number of activities that our large language model completes. Think of SDR activities, based on it reached out to 100,000 people by email, or something like that. Or we can try to think about it on successful outcomes. Some GenAI technology that helps people get refunds. And so what they can say is we will take a percentage of that refund, 25%. It's an arduous process, but our large language model can do that for you, so you don't have to bother, but you'll only get 75% of that refund. We'll take 25% of it. The good thing about that, from a pricing perspective, is that value there is easy to measure because it's money back in my wallet.
Yeah.
So perhaps but the problem with taking the value-based approach is the difficulty not only in quantifying value at times, but probably more importantly, educating your potential customers of the value. And these are not easy things to be tackling. So this sort of success-based pricing or task-based pricing is going to become much more prevalent. We're going to see a lot more moving towards value-based pricing, and that sounds quite good. The problem we have is that if you charge per seat in the traditional SaaS manner, it's very easily consumable, it's very understandable, and it's relatively frictionless. Now it starts to become quite complex, and so there's that thought around uncertainty and risk of how much value am I going to get, how much is this going to cost. So the other approach is to say, okay, we will charge you per token or per computation, and that's another way to go, and it works in certain circumstances, and we're seeing a lot of that as well, and that's fine. But in many circumstances that won't work either, because I don't know my costs. I don't know. I can't estimate. It's sort of. It can be a bit like I would feel tied into it. Cloud was kind of similar for many companies. I think it's going to cost this. It's going to be a lot cheaper than us hosting our own stuff and having all this staff to do it. We'll go to the cloud. It's really good value. To find, sometime later that they're paying extraordinary amounts of money and are thinking to go back on prem. And so there's that concern over the sort of usage-based pricing. And these are really thorny issues that are really, really intelligent people are tackling right now. But we need to see a significant shift in pricing innovation for GenAI, which is, part of that sort of business model change and that revenue change that we're going to see. So, yeah.
Very interesting space. And I think that will definitely push people to actually understand the baseline around the value our company produces or the value of this new thing. And I think it's challenging people to just think about those questions a lot earlier.
Yeah, I do agree. There was another interesting question that you asked in that sort of preamble again. You said tell me something about building large language models that people get wrong.
Yes.
And then there's just something I just really want to talk about here.
Yes, that's the
because
myth.
it's the perfect trap, and it's very, very interesting to me. And it's the 80-20 problem. It's easier to get your model's accuracy products up to 80%, but it can be very, very difficult to then start improving it beyond that, and it can take a lot more time to get those additional percentages of accuracy, and it slows right down. And can become very difficult. Now, obviously, the question you have to ask, hey, can I tolerate 80% accuracy? And maybe in some circumstances you can, and that's absolutely fine. But probably you're going to find that you want a greater degree of accuracy. And it's an 80%. What happens is that you build prototypes, you build very, very early 0 to 1 products that get to that 80% quite very quickly, and there's that real wow factor, and you really boom, so, and then because you got there so quickly, you start to sort of give out your timelines and your expectations of when this is potentially going to go to production or whatever it is, and they can be wildly off. Put it that way. And I know that LinkedIn did a fantastic engineering blog post on this, exactly this topic, and they made exactly this mistake, as so many of us have. Those quick wins to that 80% just lull you into that false sense of, we're almost there, we've done it. My overriding message for anyone to take away if they're building with large language models is don't underestimate that 20% when you are forecasting, because you will cause yourself trouble. But yeah, it can be very deceptive, and I thought it was a really interesting question. So I thought, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the part of the podcast around, what are the things that people get wrong. And I don't know if you have other ones. One,
The whole podcast has been, these different things that are going to catch you out if you take the traditional route, with pricing and monetization, timelines, all of it, and the probability aspect, the UX aspect, the education aspect, you have to have this consideration, and then on top of that, model drift and abuse of the model. And there's a phenomenal amount, but a great fun if you're that way inclined as I am. I should imagine there's an awful lot of product managers out there thinking, man, I want to get into AI, I want to get into large language models. I don't blame them. I had exactly the same unction. That's why I did what I did. But boy, there's a big learning curve, and we're all still learning, and I'm trying to disseminate that knowledge online, but it takes time, and there needs to be more of us doing that.
And that kind of brings us to like the final part, where I really encourage everyone coming on to really share or discuss around the threshold concept. So what is the bare minimum information that someone needs to know to understand the core of building AI products?
It's basically a repeat of what I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Start using AI. It's the wave is coming in, whether we like it or not. And I would rather get my surfboard out and ride that wave if possible. And I just encourage everybody else to do that as well. So start using this technology, play with it. Do some courses. They're free, they're cheap. Start learning the language of it. This is if you want to, get into this world, learn a bit of Python and talk with other researchers and people that are in the industry like me if you want, and, watch podcasts, read, absorb, make a definite and determined effort to absorb. And even if you dare veer into, what I consider on my side with my brain, very difficult areas, around these statistical and mathematical formulas, which are quite something to behold. If you really want to seriously nail product management, working specifically with large language models, and you're involved in things like the pricing and working with the researchers and the business at that level, you're going to need to do this, in my opinion. And as I say, that might be controversial. Others may differ in their view.
It's a good place. I feel like the biggest thing is starting. Find
Exactly.
the quickest way to do something. And as you said, there's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of challenges, and I think there's so much room for creativity. I'm personally very excited about the new, as you said, pricing model or monetization, because I think it's definitely moving towards valuing creativity, community, monetizing things that are a lot more human than before. Before they would more like it was monetization of time, tasks, whatever task, and you'll be paid based on how long does it take. That's going away, because everything will be quick. Or majority of things will be quick, but authenticity will take way longer. So I think that will be very interesting. And thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing a lot about the way that building products, AI products, differs from traditional products. And thank you so much for your transparency and your honesty. As I said, I encourage everyone to follow you. Really like your content. So thank you so much for coming.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. So I hope people get some value from it.
Definitely.